Hey guys, Poro here with the third team breakdown for First Stand 2026, this time for Loud from the CBLOL. For all of you who don't watch the region, I know this looks pretty common. Loud made it to 4 straight international tournaments recently, so the green logo is a familiar face to everyone. That said, make no mistake, this is a completely different Loud than what you were used to, and this team was not expected to be the winners. Gone are the days of the Robo-Tanones lineup, now it's time for some newer faces to the international scene. The big story for these guys was their internal roster turmoil that happened at quite possibly the worst moment. When the year started, Loud went for an interesting signing with a mid laner named Mago, a player who was touted as a potential mechanical prodigy back in the early 2020s after some crazy solo queue climbs. His career was put on delay for personal reasons, but he was back to play in Academy in 2025 with some up and down showings. Unfortunately, his tenure on Loud was not so great. The team went 3-4 in regular season and needed to qualify to First Stand all the way from round 1 of playoffs. The entire time, there were rumors of internal issues with some of the players, and while Loud would pick up series wins against VKS and Los on their way to the upper bracket final, all would be revealed just days before the match as Mago abruptly walked out on the team, forcing them to find a new mid laner at the last moment. The staff revealed that same day that they planned to depart with Mago for Split 2 regardless of the result, so it appears that this event was just bringing in the inevitable a month or two early, but it still put Loud in a difficult position as they had to play their toughest matches with someone who hadn't practiced in their scrims. On February 19th, CBLOL veteran Envy would take Mago's place, with his contract ending just a week later on the 26th with the expectation that they might lose. The rest was history though, as Envy would win his first title since 2020 summer, as Loud would beat Red decisively in their 2 matchups, winning the final 6 games in a row. All of the news about their mid laner aside, the actual big focus of this team is their other solo laner, the new rookie Shino. I'm not 100% certain if this is true due to the language barrier, but based on the talks I've heard, it sounds like Shino started as an AD carry and then claimed the level of top laners in Brazil wasn't that high, and that he thought he could become the best top laner if he role swapped to it. Now in his rookie split debut, it seems like he made good on that claim, as he's been the clear best laning top laner in the league with fantastic mechanics. The other 2 strongest top laners in CBLOL, FMB and Zest, were both fairly easily toppled by Shino in playoffs. Zest also made his claim to split from his dominant lane phase, but through early game, Shino was either even or ahead of his lane counterpart in every single game. FMB is less of a dominant laner and more of a strong side laner and macro player, but Shino proved his versatility as he clearly looked like the better top across their 7 games played. The other exciting part about Shino's game is that he's not just cheesing these lane wins with some solo queue champion pool that features only carries. He's just a fundamentally better laner on the standard picks like Mbessa, Cassante, Gnar, Renekton, and Rek'Sai, while still having the ability to pull out some fun carries if the draft calls for it. All of that said, I have to admit I'm a little hesitant to claim that Shino will look great at First Stand. I've seen players with dominant laning skills and teamfighting appear in CBLOL before, only to have their skills be diminished to just average when compared to the international level. With Shino's strengths being what they are, I'm worried that he'll go up against solid top laners like Pun, Clear, and Dokla, and that the conclusion will be that there are in fact levels to this. The closest relevant comp I can give would probably be Miru, a player who was super dominant domestically, and yet he performed below average in his role at the 3 internationals he attended. If Shino manages to impress anyway, and his talent can shine through against the best top laners the other regions have to offer, I'll be super excited. It's not my expectation though, and I won't be too surprised if he ends up needing to go back to the drawing board a bit for Split 2. On the flip side, I do have someone here who has a more optimistic view on Shino, and maybe he can give you all some more insight on his strengths.
Hola guys, Benvi here, coach at Viva Keystars here in the CBLOL. You may remember my team from being Brazil's representative at last year's Worlds in China. Poro has kindly asked me to give some information on our new representative. First of all, Loud didn't come to the split too hyped, and this is mainly due to the fact that they had some rookies coming in. As Poro alluded to, their biggest surprise was actually their top laner Shino, who often was the best player out of all 10 players in the game. Shino is a player I had the pleasure of coaching last year on our academy. The best way I can describe him is naive, but kinda in the best way possible. There's a story that Redbird said from when they were bootcamping in Korea, which goes along the lines of, he said, "I want to scrim Genji so I can stomp Keen. If you guys don't get stomped in your lanes, I can carry," which is pretty much how I'd sum him up. I remember similar things he said when I was coaching him. When I say these stories, I don't mean his ego is huge in a bad way. He honestly believes that he can play against the best top laners in the world and beat them, and doesn't really see a reason why not, which in my opinion is one of the biggest strengths a player can have. And for Shino, I think it's a huge strength, along with the fact that I think he learns extremely fast and is a bit of a knowledge sponge. I understand Poro's sort of hesitancy to have faith in Shino at his first international, but if any rookie player can do it, it's Shino. I think he will either shock the world and perform really well, or he'll learn enough that he can do so next time around. For me, the biggest strength in terms of gameplay would be that he's always active, he's always progressing the game. If he's not fighting, he's creating space, he's creating pressure, he's stopping bases, he's chasing tempo, he's making progress on side. And for me, this is like the biggest reason why Loud, especially early in the split when they had players underperforming, were able to stay in games, squeeze out some wins early on. Now it's even just quite hard for teams to beat them, right? This is why they won the split, obviously.
For the jungle position, Loud decided to go with the import Youngjae, a player whose career has been pretty unfortunate, not because of his skill, but just due to unlucky circumstances. He spent his developing years on the challengers rosters of both HLE and Gen G, and while he got occasional time to play for their main rosters, nothing was ever set in stone as to if he was going to be the future of either org or not. Eventually, he got his first shot on KDF, but the team wasn't very good regardless of what he did, and he would continue to play only for lower tier LCK teams while never getting a true shot. In my opinion, he actually looked pretty solid during his entire time in LCK, and I was pretty surprised he was never given a starting spot on a mid-table LCK team at worst. When Loud picked him up, I was pretty sure he was going to be good for them and one of the better junglers in the region. To my surprise, he actually hasn't been that good. I think most people who watched CBLOL would tell you he was pretty underwhelming and one of the worst players on the team. Especially in regular season, he had some real stinkers where he locked in a carry and then ran it down, but he started to clean it up a bit towards the end of playoffs. I think the expectation for first stand should actually be that he plays better than he did in his rookie CBLOL split, purely because he has experience against top level players from his time in LCK, but it should definitely be noted that he wasn't very good this year. In mid lane, Envy was the player who had to step up and join the team at a moment's notice. When I saw that he was joining, I figured Loud was cooked for upper bracket finals, but I was actually very impressed with how he played. Envy's best days are probably behind him at this point, but his years of experience clearly helped out a lot as he fit in pretty seamlessly with the team. He participated in a lot of proactive early plays, and it seemed like he was coordinated in teamfights. I don't think Envy is anything special on an international scale, and he will most likely be the worst mid laner at the tournament, but I really respect him for his ability to come in and meld with the team right away without any rocky grace period. Almost any other substitute mid laner probably sends Loud to the lower bracket where they would have to test their luck against Furia. If I had to point out anything specific about Envy, I thought his Aurora was pretty good. He looked only decent on some other champions, but the Aurora was clean. Loud decided to replace their Korean import route with another Korean import, and they went with Bull, a player who's been on a couple lower tier LCK teams. Similar to Youngjae, even though Bull isn't special within the LCK, I figured he would be completely fine when he came to CBLOL. In regular season, it looked like that was not going to happen, as he looked pretty mediocre during their 3 and 4 stretch. Not to be deterred though, Bull sparked some fun pre-game drama before upper bracket finals by dissing the Brazilian ADC pool, and he had performed poorly enough prior that the consensus community response was to clown on him and say that he was going to be gapped by Rebello. In those final 6 games though, Bull actually looked pretty solid and was clearly the better AD carry between the two. If nothing else, you can't say Bull hasn't been an entertaining player to witness in the region. At first stand, there's a pretty good chance he'll be gapped by almost every other bot duo there. His split was pretty inconsistent, and all of the other regions are sending some strong bot duos overall, so I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being dead last in terms of performance. Hopefully he keeps up the trash talk though, because the confidence would be hilarious if he ends up overperforming and taking some names. Finally, Loud support is Redbird, a pretty familiar face to the international scene at this point. He's been to 4 international tournaments, with the earliest one being all the way back for Worlds 2017. In the past, he's someone who I've criticized quite a lot. For his most recent tournament in MSI 2024, I put him pretty low on my tier list, saying he was your average minor region support who could only play the simple engage champions and would die a lot. At MSI 2024, that's pretty much exactly what happened as well. When I heard Loud were picking him up for Split 3 of 2025 and keeping him for 2026, I was pretty skeptical and I figured he would be someone who would lower the ceiling of the team. However, he's pleasantly surprised me actually. From what I've seen this split, it feels like he's transformed a lot of his game and is now a solid all-rounder in the role. He still occasionally has the games where he locks in an engaged tank or an enchanter and dies almost 10 times in a loss, but he's also had some engaged games that were super clean, especially on his Leona. He's also started expanding his champion pool to include some of the ranged supports, playing some Bard, Nami, Nico, and Lulu. I would be a bit hesitant to say he's got all of those down though, as there have been a few funny games like his 0-10 Nico win. Overall, I have a higher opinion of Redbird for this tournament than I ever did before, and I'm thinking he can have a fun mix of good and bad games depending on what champion he gets. When it comes to the team as a whole, there isn't too much to say. CBLOL as a region plays a fairly similar style across the board, with the players winning their games through strong mechanics and non-stop early and mid-game plays. Loud isn't too much different, and most of their wins in playoffs were battles of individual dominance until their opposition fell apart in the mid-game macro department. Furia and Red were both like this domestically. For Red, they could never quite close out their leads cleanly and would always find a way to give the enemy team chances to win. Furia was a lot simpler, as sometimes IU, Gigo, and Toots would play underwhelming games, or in Gigo's case, sometimes he would run it down early hard enough to solo lose on his own. On that note, it's worth talking a bit about what happened in the Americas Cup, as CBLOL had a strong showing in this one. The narrative around LCS and CBLOL from this tournament has flipped a bit, as Furia specifically played great, taking down both C9 and Sentinels with ease. This is making people wonder whether Loud has what it takes to beat Lion, G2, and Secret Whales, but I think this is a bit of a big leap to make. Red were clearly a better team than Furia domestically, and Red lost to both C9 and Sentinels in fairly convincing fashion. In my opinion, based on what I saw from Red and CBLOL, they looked about how I expected them to look. I also think Sentinels was playing at about their domestic level. The two teams that are throwing everyone for a loop are C9 and Furia, and I think that while C9 definitely choked hard and underperformed, the biggest thing to note for me is that Furia's solo laners are playing way better than they were before. Gigo's games have been pretty stable, and Toots played super well across the board. This is now somewhat of a trend for me, as Toots was also fairly underwhelming in 2025, except for his great performance at MSI. I'm starting to think Gigo and Toots are just international risers, and when the two solo laners are playing better, it makes the rest of the team's job much easier. All of this to say, I think Furia in their America's Cup form would actually beat Loud in a best of 5. Loud's team as a unit aren't really too special, and apart from Shino popping off, they tend to win their games from being fundamentally more sound than their opposition and finding advantages in the chaos. Against the rest of the top competition at First Dance 2026, that type of style won't really fly, and I'll be very surprised if Loud manage to make it out of their group to knockout stage. That's all I have for you for this one. 3 down, 5 to go. I have a Patreon for people who want to support me more while I'm making these videos. There are 3 tiers, each with varying amounts of benefits, including different types of behind-the-scenes content, and even a custom Poro drawing that I'll display in video outros. If that interests you, check out the Patreon link in the description. I'll see you all for the next one. Bye!